I would like to welcome Steve Case and Bertie Niemeier to the stage for a fireside chat.
Well, Steve, it's good to see you again after so many years. I think it was in the early 90s.
Good to see everybody here, particularly that's a beautiful day. I was a little worried that people might play hooky or something.
It's really nice coffee table here. I think it probably needs a couple copies of Virginia Business. I've got one from 2008 when Steve was on the cover here. So I think we're both doing fine after all these years. So, got a few questions today.
Maybe before you get into that, I just wanted a little context, why I was here. First of all, Senator Warner has been very helpful on a lot of things, asked me to be here, that was part of it. But the other was that I think things like this, where people from different regions of the state bringing different perspectives in a nonpartisan way, is really critically important. So just creating that environment, and I know you're kind of having some discussions, the discussion will continue, are extremely important. The frustration I have on some of these issues is everybody kind of is in their own little silo doing their own little thing, and there's not a lot of kind of connections, not a lot of network effect, if you will. And so that having an event like this, I think, is terrific. And obviously, from in terms of Virginia specifically, as was said in the beginning, I moved here in 1983, so it was 29 years ago, and started AOL here. Had, raised 5 kids here, and still raising 2 of them. I guess I'm still raising all 5 of them, but 2 of them are still in high school with us. We started a Case Foundation here, and so it's been an important part of our life. Actually, from here I'm going to Madison, Virginia. Our latest business is actually the wine business. We decided that to get into the business, mostly actually because we think that the Virginia wine business is on the rise, and we want to do what we can to kind of shine a spotlight on the fact that the wines are better than people think, and there's a lot of momentum. So we bought a place, and repositioning it really as the best of Virginia, trying to celebrate not just our wine, but the best wines, the best food, and so forth. So if you ever get out to the Madison, Virginia area, come visit us.
And I would just like to add, I appreciate everybody giving up their Saturday morning time to be here today. I think the last time I've seen this many people on a Saturday morning was at the youth soccer tournament, and it occurs to me that some of you may be giving up some of that kind of time to be here, and it's a great service to the Commonwealth and a testament to your individual leadership that you do that. I know Steve is best known for starting America Online, but what you may not know about him, he's actually a serial entrepreneur. Not only is he, did he start America Online, but he's been involved in other travel and healthcare, and now a wine business. They say that's a great way to make a large fortune small. So good luck with that.
We understand that. We've been warned.
But Virginia is a wonderful place to do that, being the 5th largest wine producing state in the United States. So, although the speakers this morning, I guess my takeaway was that we have to be able to move away from simply looking good to doing well. So I'm going to have to take that as a personal challenge, and we'll see how we can do. But to move on to the questions, the first one has to do with the recently passed Jobs Act. That was a bipartisan bill that they're now considering a follow-up jobs bill that's being sponsored by Senators Warner, Moran, Rubio, and Coons, called Startup 2.0. What do you think, Steve, is the best thing the federal government could do to jumpstart job growth through entrepreneurship and innovation?
Well, a number of things, but I should say that the Jobs Act, which stands for Jumpstarting Our Business Startups, and there's a number of things related to access to capital, making it easier for entrepreneurs to get started with crowdfunding, and reducing some of the securities regulations, so there's more of an IPO path for younger companies. A number of different things really happened because of the leadership of Senator Warner and also Majority Leader Cantor, so two Virginias. They actually came together with, the president obviously was involved as well, and a lot of other people were involved. But they really were pivotal in getting people to focus on it. The reason it's important is if you look at, 2 things. If you look at the history of this country, I think it's worth pointing out, in addition to having the pioneers that were willing to sail across oceans to be here, and the patriots, including many obviously from Virginia, that helped kind of forge the democracy, that a lot of what's made the country great is the work of entrepreneurs building companies and whole industries, which has led us to become the leading economy in the world. It didn't happen by accident. It was people out there taking risks and creating entire industries. And so that's what's led the United States to it was a startup a couple hundred years ago to now being the leading economy in the world. So sometimes I think we lose sight of the role entrepreneurs have played in making America what America is, number one. And number two, more recently, if you look at the data, and the Kauffman Foundation does great research on entrepreneurship, their data basically says that in the last 3 decades, 40 million jobs have been created by young, high-growth entrepreneurial companies. And it accounts for all the net job creation over the last 3 decades. Big companies as a group, say the Fortune 500, account for a lot of jobs, but don't account for a lot of job growth overall. Some grow, some decline, but overall as a sector. And some of these small businesses, just the Main Street, restaurants and dry cleaners are critically important and also account for a lot of jobs. But there's sort of a little bit of a churning that goes on there. The real driver in terms of job growth is these entrepreneurial companies. So the question then becomes, how do we continue to build on that momentum, and how do we make sure we remain the world's most entrepreneurial nation? And there's some things that government shouldn't do, because ultimately it is about entrepreneurs and investors in the private sector and so forth. But there are some things that government must do, and trying to separate the two and get them focused on the things where they kind of have to play a role is critical. So as I mentioned, the Jobs Act was the first step. It legalizes this idea of crowdfunding, and for those who aren't familiar with it, essentially it allows you to use the internet to get a large number of people to make relatively small investments in your company. It's sort of like you can individuals can invest up to $10,000 in a company. The crowdfunding overall, you can aggregate up to $1 million. So but for a lot of entrepreneurs, that's the difference between getting started and not getting started. There are a lot of areas that don't have venture capitalists. There are a lot of people that don't have friends and family that have the ability to help fund it. So this crowdfunding, I think, is very important to kind of give people a shot. And there were some other things in the Jobs Act. It passed with bipartisan support in the House and then the Senate, and was signed by the President about 2 months ago. So that's now the law. The second piece of that is the Startup Act 2.0 that actually was introduced about 3 weeks ago by Senator Warner and also Senator Rubio of Florida, a Republican, Senator Coons of Delaware, a Democrat, Senator Moran of Kansas, a Republican. So the privilege of standing with those 4 folks to announce this. And then about a week later, it was introduced in the House, again with bipartisan support. So the hope, and it's a challenge because it's election year and people are more doing this than doing this, but the hope is, building on the Jobs Act, that there can be bipartisan momentum around the Startup Act, which deals with a number of things, but the most important piece of it really relates to what I think of as winning the global battle for talent. So it's around high-skilled immigration, entrepreneurs and engineers. There's all kinds of obviously complicated issues with immigration broadly. I mean, what do you do with 11.5 million people that are here illegally? And there's a lot of proposals that have been put in place to deal with that, and that's a vigorous debate and kind of a hotly contested kind of debate, frankly. But while we have that national debate, we also need to realize that ultimately these entrepreneurial companies require kind of the best and brightest. 40% of Fortune 500 companies were started by a first or second generation immigrant, and we have that's been the history of what's made us great. Right now, over half of the people that get PhDs and master degrees in the STEM fields, technology and so forth, are from other countries. If you look at Stanford, MIT, or Carnegie Mellon, so that's the data. But the majority of those people, once they get those degrees, are forced to leave, to go back to their countries because they don't have the ability to stay here. It's crazy. And so part of what the Startup Act 2.0 does is says when these people, and we're not talking about huge numbers, like 50,000 people would be, at max would be eligible for the STEM visa. But these are 50,000 people that if you look at the history of Google or Yahoo or Intel, which are some of these companies, end up creating potentially tens of thousands of jobs. So we really need to make it easy for those folks to stay here as opposed to educate them and kick them out. The analogy I've used just to kind of get under people's skin in Washington is imagine if we propose that we invite, say, folks from China to attend our Naval Academy, train them on our naval strategies, and then once they graduated, we kick them out and force them to go back to China, say, and join the Chinese Navy. Nobody would think that would make sense, but that's essentially what we're doing with these PhDs and masters. We're inviting them here, giving them great education, often subsidizing the education, and then kicking them out. If anything, we should require them to stay. You got this education, you now owe it to you. You should stay for at least 5 years or 10 years to kind of pay back what we've invested in you. They'd love to in most cases, but we've kind of forced them to leave. So this issue of talent and making sure we're a magnet for talent, I think, is critically important. There are other aspects of the Startup Act, but that's probably the most important. So these are the kind of things that when you talk about legalizing crowdfunding or an on-ramp for initial public offerings or changing immigration policy around high-skilled engineers, particularly, those are things that have to be done at the federal government level. They're not, so those are things that people in Washington have to focus on. There are other things that can happen at the state level, other things that government should stay out of altogether, but getting the government to focus on the things that do matter and can move the needle to make sure we remain entrepreneurial, I think is critically important.
Well, you correctly pointed out that if it were not for small companies, there would be no big companies.
Yeah.
And you've had a lot of entrepreneurship experience, and you mentioned there are perhaps some other things that government should do besides just these two acts. I mean, what are some of the other things that you feel that government or business need to do to encourage more?
Well, I think it's a mix, and I wouldn't put all the burden or responsibility on the federal government. There's a role for state government, and there's a role for the private sector. Other things the federal government can do relate to things like commercialization of federally funded research. Generally, we don't do a good job of taking those ideas and really making them work in the marketplace, and there's a whole host of reasons for it, and some do better than others on tech transfer, but most overall don't do a great job. So we're investing. Now, occasionally we do a good job, and I'm a beneficiary of that. The internet was essentially invented by folks who were funded by DARPA, defense agency, with the idea that we need some kind of network in case there's like a nuclear war, that basically it will have enough redundancy that it will basically survive all kinds of bad things that can happen. That really was a federally funded effort to create a network infrastructure that essentially was the foundation of which the internet, which obviously led to a lot of companies and wealth creation and job creation and so forth. So occasionally you get it right, but most of the time there's a lot of great ideas out there, but they get stuck there. And so figuring out ways to create incentives so there's better tech transfer. I even think one approach that's worthy of some testing at least is essentially open sourcing the intellectual property that's from these things. Right now, if it's created, then there's a whole effort of how do you license it, what are the terms of the license and so forth. And generally, in most universities, tech transfer offers lose money. The revenue they generate doesn't even cover their costs. And maybe another approach would be to say, when these things are created, we're going to just put them out there, let everybody know about them, let entrepreneurs have at them, and hopefully, some will then make them successful, and hopefully then they'll be grateful for the role that the university played in helping create that, might give something back in that way. So I think this issue of research and commercialization is important. Also looking at regulation, are there things that do make it more difficult for companies to get started and scale up, things like that are also roles. The other thing, though, that I think is important, because in addition to working on this Jobs Council, which was bipartisan, actually, it's chaired by Jeff Immelt, the CEO of General Electric, who's a Republican. So I give the president a lot of credit for getting people together from both sides, saying, look, we need to create some jobs here. What are some ideas that might create some some jobs? I've also chaired an initiative called Startup America Partnership, which was really designed to build up the entrepreneurial ecosystems in regions all across the country. Right now we have a few, Silicon Valley being the most obvious, that are vibrant. But there are many other areas of the country, obviously many areas of Virginia, that don't have that robust kind of ecosystem. And so what that Startup America Partnership is doing, and one of the initiatives was we launched a Startup of Virginia initiative a few months ago, is try to get all the different people who, kind of like you're going to do here, that are interested in this topic, entrepreneurs and investors and people from universities and so forth, together and create more of a network effect and more of a momentum around how you network together people who are interested in making angel investments, for example. Right now it tends to be pretty diffused. If you have an idea, it's tough to figure out a way to get to it. So there's a role for government, but there's also a role for the private sector, not waiting for government or expecting government to solve all the problems. What can we all do as individuals, kind of working together in a more networked way to make it a little easier for the entrepreneurs to get started in the startup phase or to scale in what's sometimes called the speed up phase. There are a lot of things that we can all do.
We've talked a little bit about education today, and with respect to entrepreneurship, I think that both you and the senator are examples of people who started out fairly young, at a time when you felt you could take risk in business and afford to fail. But when it comes to sort of the student loan college cost scenario that we're in today, what advice would you have for a recent college grad who is interested in entrepreneurship but stays in a safe job because of a student loan burden?
Well, a couple things. And it's hard to generalize because some people are going to be on different paths, and so it's always a little bit hard to generalize. But I guess I'd say two things. The first is there are ways. I know the SBA has been working on this. If you have a student loan, to essentially have the amount you have to pay every month reduced based on your income. So if you opt, for example, to be a teacher, it can be adjusted. Also, if you opt to be an entrepreneur, it can be adjusted. So if you're basically saying, I'm on a path where I'm going to make a little less money for 2-3 years, but I'm going to do something that hopefully in the long run will be successful and make more money. Can I pay a little less on my loan in the short run and pay a little bit more down the road? There's efforts underway to create a little bit of a path that makes that possible, not just for entrepreneurship, but more broadly. So I guess that would be one. The second, though, I'd say, is this has changed a lot just in the past half century, and I think people in this room understand this. But the notion that the choice is between the safe path of joining a stable company, for a Fortune 500 company, for example, or the risky path of starting something or joining a startup, it isn't really the case. It is true that startups are risky and many fail, so that part is true. But it's certainly less true than it used to be that these big companies are safe. And they're undergoing a lot of transition as well, and there's a lot of, you'll pick up the paper and somebody will lay off 30,000 people or something. It's like, whoa. I thought that was safe. Well, I guess it's not safe. And the reason it's not safe is, number one, we're in a much more competitive global economy. And number two, a lot of these big companies essentially are incumbents playing defense, trying to protect the status quo. They're kind of like defenders in a world where entrepreneurial attackers are trying to change the game and change the business model and challenge the status quo and challenge the incumbents. So you have this battle between attackers and defenders, and generally the attackers win. It may take 5 years, may take 25 years, but eventually the new technology, the new idea, the new approach, the new business model, a new better way to provide things, eventually will chip away, and most attackers are not that good at evolving and morphing and pivoting to be innovators. Most defenders are the attackers are flexible. The defenders generally aren't. So I would say that this notion that that's the safe path, maybe it is, and maybe you'll pick something that really is safe, but it's certainly less safe than it was before. The notion that graduated from school, which is still common when I graduated from college in 1980, so was that over 30 years ago. There was a sense that maybe you graduate, you join a company, and then you retire from that company like 40 years later or something. And that's not really happening, as much. It's rare, and so I think people are likely to have multiple jobs, and in some cases likely to have multiple careers. That maybe for 10 or 15 years they kind of do this thing, and then they kind of do that thing. So it's not. I would encourage people who are passionate about something. And have an idea they want to pursue, or people that they work with or know, or what have you, that they have an idea they want to pursue, that if they're excited by that and they're passionate by that, the entrepreneurial path of joining some kind of startup, go for it, because I think that's an important part of the economy and something we should encourage. And the alternative that is sort of that's not a safe path alternative. Yeah. May not be all safe anyway.
Well, just shifting gears a little bit, we've talked a lot about technology, and before lunch, Chris Shimura gave us a presentation on some of the changing industry and workforce characteristics in Virginia, and we've heard a lot about high growth companies, the so-called gazelles,
right.
And they seem to be mostly in the tech sector. But do you see other areas outside of technology where a startup could have a chance to be a gazelle?
Oh, sure. But I actually would say that most companies now are tech companies, even if they're not in the tech sector. Because most companies are, to some degree, whether you're a hotel or a restaurant, or McDonald's uses a lot of technology. Basically, your car you buy these days is a computer with a bunch of seats and windows. I mean, so there is a technology, IBM or company that pure Microsoft, pure play technology companies. Maybe that's the tech sector, but it's pretty hard to find a company that does not have technology infused through what they do in an increasingly significant way, which is part of the reason why we need as a nation to really push harder on the engineering side, because this is a skill set that is much more broadly applicable. So most companies are technology companies, but B, the answer to the question about the tech sector, sure, there are high growth gazelle companies, many outside the tech sector. I'll give you a couple examples. One that's not too far from here in Baltimore is Under Armour. Basically, Kevin Plank was like playing football and thought the undershirt he was wearing seemed kind of sweaty. Why he didn't quite think that made a lot of sense, so he kind of came up with something that wasn't sweaty, and sold a bunch of them, and sold a bunch more, and sold a bunch more, and created some other products. And now Under Armour is a global brand of, I don't know, current sale, a few $1 billion of revenue, I think. Many thousands of employees. That's like shirts. It's sort of, again, he'd say there's some technology in terms of how they made it a better shirt, and there's some technology in their running shoes and so forth. So it's, but it's basically athletic apparel. It's not like software or computers or servers or something like that. And which was actually one of the great successes of the last decade, is in the restaurant sector, which is Chipotle. It's a burrito. But guess what? There's the old burrito. This little company with a burrito now has 1,300 restaurants, 30,000 employees, and a market value of $12 billion of burritos. And again, there's some technology there in their ordering system and whatever. But inventory, I'm sure there's a lot of technology there. But it's fundamentally a burrito. And so they basically had one place. I think it was in Denver, and they now have like 1,300 places. Five Guys in Virginia. Again, it's a burger. It's not it's not a huge invention. But it was a little better burger, and and now they have, I don't know, 1,000 of them, something like that. So there are many examples of these gazelle fashion. One of the people on the Startup America board is Tory Burch, who started with nothing and now has a pretty significant global brand and global business. So I think there are many examples of high growth entrepreneurial companies that are not tech companies. You know, I think even if many of these companies have some technology aspect to them.
So technology is everywhere, but we still want to see there's opportunities in other places.
Yeah, and I actually think more broadly, one of the things that's really interesting to me, because I've been doing this for a little while, is as I reflect on the last 25 years, it sort of was the first internet revolution. And AOL certainly pioneered that, but there are many other companies. When we got started, nobody knew what we were doing. Nobody thought what we were doing anybody'd care about. And when we started, 3% of people were online. 97% weren't. And the 3% used online services on average 1 hour a week. So virtually nobody was using it, and the few who were using it infrequently at best. Now, of course, almost everybody's online, and it's multiple devices and multiple networks, and some might say we're online too much now. It's kind of gone from nobody knew what it was to everybody knows what it does, nobody's using it, to everybody's using it an hour a week, to using it several hours a day. And particularly, it's not just ubiquitous now, it's now mobile because of smartphones. You're essentially carrying a computer in your pocket, you're carrying the connectivity in your pocket, so you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of new businesses. So that was the last 25 years. Great. That's sort of kind of mission accomplished. We basically were able to kind of get people to take it seriously and make it part of everyday life, which was always the vision for AOL. So that was the last 25 years. I think the next 25 years are going to be the second internet revolution. And it's not going to be internet companies per se. It's going to be how the internet changes everything else we do. Education, healthcare, things that are an important part of our life, an important part of the economy. Those are going to change a lot in the next 25 years. And some of it will be related to technology, but it's not exclusively related to technology. So I think you'll see some giant companies built on the back of some of these trends, and they will transform some of these industries that frankly need transformation, need some disruption. I don't think anybody's particularly happy with how our education works. I'm not sure anybody's particularly happy with how our healthcare works, and there is a role for technology, internet, more consumerism to I think play a transformative role, and that will challenge the incumbents, challenge the status quo. Some will rise to the occasion, some will fall by the wayside, and a whole generation of new companies with new ideas will kind of be propelled into the future. And if it's an education company with a different approach, sure, technology will be part of it, but I'd probably put that in the education sector, not necessarily the tech sector. And so I think there's going to be enormous opportunity. Now, that goes back to the first thing we talked about. We need to make sure as a nation, those companies are starting here in this country, hopefully some in Virginia, and not somewhere else, because that's the global risk is that this stuff is going to happen. That's almost certain. You can debate the pace of it. You can debate exactly how it kind of the twists and turns of it. You can't, I think, debate the inevitability of it. But it's not at all clear that we'll, as a nation, be the winner in these transformations. I mean, we should be. We have it certainly within ourselves to be, but it's going to require us to rally around, almost double down on, as a nation, on entrepreneurship. Recognize it is sort of the secret sauce that's driven us to our position in the world, and we better not get cocky or complacent, because a lot of people are stepping up their game and making it much easier for capital to flow, much easier for talent to come, we could lose this next round if we don't take it pretty seriously.
Well, when we turn to the future, in Virginia's economy in particular, it's been pointed out that with the likelihood of federal budget cuts, that we could see some severe times here in the state of Virginia, and that one of our problems is a lack of a technically skilled workforce statewide. Mm-hmm. It tends to be concentrated in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And this is not unique in Virginia. It's a problem that's going to be faced by many states, but I think I'd argue that because of our concentration of our economy in technology in the growth sector, with federal spending driving much of it, that we've got a lot at risk here in the state of Virginia. So in attacking the workforce problem, in light of your experience at AOL and other ventures, what can we do sort of at the state level to help improve our workforce?
Well, I think it's a fair concern. I mean, I travel around somewhat, and I think actually Virginia is better positioned than most states in terms of some of the issues and some of the the trends. But clearly, it's not evenly spread, and clearly there's some sectors that are overly reliant on essentially kind of government funding. So trying to figure out ways to lessen that reliance, I think makes a lot of sense. Some of the things we're trying to do with the Startup America Partnership, I think, can kind of be applied, because even what we're essentially trying to do there is say that while entrepreneurship is important in the nation, it's not evenly spread throughout the nation. There's some pockets where it's vibrant and a lot of places where it's nascent. Yet in most of those places, there are entrepreneurs with good ideas. They just don't have either the capital or the ability to attract people or get attention to take their idea and start building a company. So how do you, in other places, and our focus is in these more different regions of the country, how do you create more, essentially more of a network effect? It's not rocket science. What it really is about is kind of connecting the dots between people that are interested in some of these topics and creating an ongoing dialogue, collaboration process so that they're able to get more done. And so it's sort of on what they call in the technology world network density. How do you create that network density? And I think understanding in each part of each region what really are opportunities. Not everybody's going to be great at everything. So looking at ways where there are particular niches of things where maybe that's a place that we really could focus because we have sort of a core strength. For example, the Midwest really been decimated over the last 3-4 decades by a loss of a lot of manufacturing jobs, particularly the automobile industry, things like that. But as a result, in Detroit and Cleveland and a lot of other places, because not one just the auto company, it was the whole supply chain. There was lots of companies and millions of jobs that were kind of affected by some of these things. But in the last decade or so, they said, okay, well, that's kind of a bummer. That we kind of had this thing going pretty well. It's kind of going south. Rather than just throw up our hands and say, we had our run and now we're guess we need to pack it in or move somewhere. Let's figure out what we can do. And they actually have come up with some creative ideas to have all kinds of kind of next generation, later manufacturing things in particular working. And some are successful, some are not successful. But there's a momentum now and investment flowing to some of these companies in some of these regions. Because people did take the time to say, what do we got here, and what can we do with it to try to create a brighter future than we're on a trajectory to do. So it's hard. It's easier, obviously, to be in a place where there's tremendous momentum and excitement, and already has great people, and more people want to come there, and there's a momentum to it. Now there's some downsides, like Northern Virginia has some traffic problems, I must admit. And it's not like all perfect. It's amazing for me because we started in the Tyson's Corner area. Like Tyson's Corner is now becoming a big metropolis. It's unbelievable. But it's because there's now that kind of network density. So it's hard to generalize, but looking at what's unique about a particular area, and is there a way to create more of a network effect and create a sort of a magnet of talent. There may be ways to leverage some of these new things like crowdfunding that the companies with a particular expertise that don't have access to capital because they're in a place where people just aren't investing in capital. Maybe that's a tool that people can capitalize on. Now, I'll give you an example. The crowdfunding actually exists today. The law changes to allow equity crowdfunding. Right now, there's essentially project crowdfunding, and the difference is you can go to sites like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, there's a whole bunch of them, and if you have an idea, like you want to make a documentary movie, so here's my documentary movie, and here's a little clip of my documentary movie, and I need to raise $100,000 to film my documentary movie. Would you like to be part of this effort? And if you join our effort, if you donate $100 when my documentary movie is done, I'll send you 10 DVDs, and if you join, give me $1,000, I'll put you in the credits as like, thank you, Steve Case, for helping to fund my movie. There are a bunch of people that have done this. One company did this with, again, goes back to manufacturing, with a product called the Pebble watch, which essentially was a kind of a next generation technology kind of watch. They put this up like 4 months ago on this site Kickstarter. They've gotten $10 million in 3 months of people wanting to buy the Pebble watch. $10 million. I have no idea where this company is. I could find out, but I just don't know. But it could be, somewhere in Virginia. Somebody with that idea could post that idea and say, if you want, in this case, you can actually buy the watch, or people are essentially pre-ordering this watch. So we're going to make this thing, but we need to get a bunch of people to order it before we have the money to go make it. That's essentially what they're doing. But the other alternative, if you have a restaurant, you are 5 guys. Maybe you're 6 guys or something. The next generation of 5 guys, 6 guys. So you're 6 guys. I got even better burgers still. And I got like 1 6 guys in like I don't know, Culpeper. But I think 6 guys is awesome, and I can see how we could have dozens of 6 guys or hundreds of 6 guys. And you could post on a crowdfunding site, I want to raise $500,000 to create a franchising program for 6 guys, and I'll sell, I don't know, 25% of my company in exchange for that amount of money, and get 25 or 50 people each to contribute. They each own a little bit of the company, and that will allow 6 guys to instead of being just one place, maybe it will succeed, maybe it'll fail, but it has the possibility of multiple places. So I think this crowdfunding thing is not going to be particularly helpful in Silicon Valley. They don't need a lot of help. There's a lot of capital. That's fine. New York, a lot of capital. That's fine. But a lot of areas around the nation, I'm sure a lot of areas around Virginia, I think if you have a good idea, you have new ways to get attention for it and raise capital for it.
Let's talk about healthcare for a minute, because I know you have some experience there. We know that healthcare is a huge chunk of our gross domestic product here in the United States. In fact, I heard a statistic just last week from Secretary of Health and Human Services in Virginia, Bill Hazel, on healthcare, where he said the United States has the highest percentage of GDP going to healthcare of any country in the world. So we're dead last on that measure. Second to last would be Switzerland, which he said, by the way, they cover everybody there. But the difference between our percentage of GDP going to healthcare and Switzerland's is enough to double our entire defense expenditures in the United States. So that gives you some idea of just the magnitude of the problem. And we know that all capital seeks a return. So there's plenty of money in this sector. But what can we do to get better efficiency? And is it technology? Is it medical records? What are some of your ideas on how we can do a better job?
I think it's all above. The healthcare is about 1/6 of the United States economy, so it's a huge, and it's growing. It's on a path to, and part of the reason that everybody's concerned about the deficit, they should be concerned about deficit. I'm sure Senator Warner started talking about it. He's like really concerned about the deficit. A lot of it's related to healthcare. I mean, these entitlement program, Medicare and so forth, are just clearly not sustainable, and so you need a reinvention of healthcare. We've done some things in that space, and we'll do more. But I think part of it is dividing it into there's really 3 parts, as I think of it, as of the healthcare system. The first is the process, the business, if you will, of keeping people healthy. Some call it wellness, or there's a lot of different names for it. The second is managing chronic disease, heart disease, and things like that. Diabetes is now a big one. And the third is essentially dealing with the more serious life-threatening disease. Those are 3 separate things. I think there's enormous opportunity particularly on the first, and there's the beginnings of a lot of innovation on the first in terms of giving people, consumers, tools to make better choices about what they do. Getting a little bit more exercise by walking around a little more. Obviously eating a little bit less, being a little smarter about you eat pretty basic stuff. But there's a lot of evidence that, and I'm sure we're all subject to this. If you're driving down the street and it's a 35-mile zone and you're going like 45, but you see one of those little blinking signs saying you're going 45 and it's 35, you'll slow down. There's that instant personalized feedback saying you're going 45 minutes, 35, you'll slow down. You might not slow down to 35, but you'll get close to 35. Similarly, there's a lot of devices. I actually wear something like these devices that track your how many steps you take and connects with your smartphone and so forth. I walk more. I'm more sensitive to it. I just do. I think most people would. It's sort of more top of mind. And it also buzzes me every 30 minutes if I haven't gotten out of my chair. Probably buzzing me right now. Again, it's simple, but it matters. Oh, I guess I better walk around the office or walk around the block or something. It's little, simple stuff like that has an impact in terms of getting people moving and kind of getting out there. So there's a lot of things on the this wellness side that I think technology and consumer products like this I think are going to be very powerful. The nice thing about that business is it really is a consumer business. The next two I'm going to talk about are not consumer businesses because the payers make the decision, not the people. And so managing chronic disease and managing life-threatening disease require different kind of approaches, and technology is a tool to do that, and having a more personalized sense of, we waste a lot of money on drugs that don't work, but we don't know they don't work, but we will over time have a better sense of what works and what doesn't work for different people in different circumstances. So I think there is a role for technology, but there's also a role for kind of consumer empowerment and encouraging people to take more control of what they're doing and give them the tools to be able to do that and be able to make better choices based on better data.
Well, wow. Well, we're doing pretty well on time, but we've got a little bit of time left here, and I just think it'd be good to turn it over to some questions from the audience here. There's one in the back.
Mr. Case, thank you for joining us today. My name is Rob Laka, and one of the issue areas that we didn't broach was social entrepreneurship and impact investing.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in how we can reach beyond Northern Virginia to some of these other parts of the state. And you were quoted in the article about the Giving Pledge recently, talking about how we can use foundation dollars, and I'm even thinking government dollars, to sort of spur these businesses that have a broader impact on society. And I actually left government recently to start a consulting firm to start doing this. So
Good.
Pursuing this as an entrepreneur as well. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, maybe I'll first of all frame it for the people to understand. There's beginnings of a wave. I think it will probably take 5 or 10 years before it really settles out. But the beginning of a wave that some call social enterprise, some call impact investing. But it's trying to build bridges to the world of just being in a business which is focused on making money, period, and being in a nonprofit just focused on doing good, period. And how do you create more of a do well, do good integrated model, which I think has enormous appeal to a lot of people, particularly people who are graduating from schools now and sort of don't think it's sort of a false choice that they have to kind of go left or go right. So there's all kinds of different examples of this, different models of this. One, for example, is a company called Tom's Shoes that basically if you buy one of these pair of these shoes, they give a free pair of shoes to somebody who can't afford one. So it sort of integrates sort of giving back into the core business model of the company. There are others that, like Paul Newman, who passed away, he created a whole brand, Newman's Own, and 100% of the profits were given to charity. So there's different versions of this. But I think it's got a lot of appeal to a lot of people. And over time, once it gets structured right and people better understand the different segments. It's not like one thing. There's like 6 or 8 different things. For example, recently there was the concept of what's called a B corporation was introduced. That a lot of companies are S corporations or different things, but the B corporation builds into the charter of the company a responsibility for the board to make sure it's not just focused on profit, but has a broader purpose to it. And there are a bunch of companies, Patagonia and others, that have basically converted to this B corporation status. I think it's a very exciting area. The reason it hasn't taken off yet is because it is confusing to people, and people aren't quite sure kind of how to deal with it, and what exactly should the return expectation be? Should it be the same as traditional business? Should you modify it? How do you count the other impact, what some people call the double bottom line, the impact beyond just the profit side. But I think it's an area of great interest. And you mentioned there's this thing called this Giving Pledge that Bill Gates started, Warren Buffett They both of them started along with Melinda Gates, and there's 70 or 80 people who were part of that. There was a meeting of that group a couple months ago, I guess, and this issue of impact investing was one of the big discussions. And it was, Bill Gates and Midiara, the founder of eBay, and a bunch of other folks are really interested in trying to understand what could be done in this kind of hybrid space. So I'm glad you're working on it.
Other questions?
At the beginning of your talk, I think you said that government might play a role in reducing the security burden on entrepreneurial businesses. Could you explain that, please?
The security burden. I'm not sure what I said. If I did, I'm not sure what I meant. What's that?
Cybersecurity?
Don't remember saying about it. Oh, no, it was more the investment the government made in research and the investment that led to the funding of DARPA, which led to the funding of the internet, which was designed to meet national security needs. That investment essentially later got commercialized as the internet and created a lot of economic growth. So it's an example of most companies, in fact all companies, can't fund the level of basic research because of some of the pressures of kind of making profits and so forth. And the government, the federal government, needs to play that role. You can debate how much of it should be and what the areas should be focused on, but there is an important role of federal funding of basic research, and there are many examples where things have been invented by the government funding, essentially, not just the internet, GPS, which we all take for granted. A lot of these things really were done as government projects for government purposes, and then over time, we're able to be more broadly distributed in ways that improve people's lives, but also enabled a lot of businesses to get created and a lot of jobs to be created. So that's what I was trying to say as a government role.
Right here. We'll get you. You go ahead.
I've read your background. I serve on various boards, including Viacom, and follow the AOL Warner. With all your wealth, you could do anything you choose, besides a winery and some of these things that aren't going to necessarily change the world.
Hey,
Well, AOL did.
We're trying to build the Virginia wine industry, create thousands of jobs, drive wine tourism.
Well, that's where.
It's noble purpose.
Well, I want to lead to
We'll
my
drink
question.
the best and sell the rest.
I'm sure you could sell it. What would be your 3 major things you want to be remembered for? I think of Thomas Jefferson, and he wanted to be remembered for writing the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights of the state, and the founder of UVA.
That's pretty tough. Well,
Well,
you're giving me a pretty tough standard there.
well, you're already going to change the Virginia tourism and wine
Yeah,
business.
exactly. Yeah.
But I'm serious. When you think about all the things you could do with your young age, with your resources, with your contacts and networks, we've heard a lot of concerns this morning about what we need to do as leaders. I'd love to hear your personal story of the 3 things you want to be remembered for. And that you may not even, maybe just 2, if there's a third one that is TBD.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying I'm young, because I was actually realized when I first met Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, he wasn't even born when I started AOL. I guess I was at a New York startup thing, and it's almost like grandfather cases here to share his war stories, and we just have to listen to him for a little while. Well, I think there's one, which is, and interestingly, the Revolution, my investment company, invested a couple dozen different things, and the Case Foundation, which my wife Jean runs, have actually the exact same vision statement, mission statement. We invest in people and ideas that can change the world. And sometimes we do that through the prism of businesses that we think can, like AOL did, or Zipcar with car sharing or something, that there's something about that business that's, we think, captivating and will improve people's lives. Sometimes it's funding non-profit initiatives, things either we launch or organizations that we believe in and we fund. So it's how do you have the greatest impact in the world? And for me, the prism I mostly look at it through is entrepreneurship and celebrating entrepreneurship, and so I guess in a just being viewed as one of America's great entrepreneurs who really tried to change the world in a variety of different sectors by betting on innovation and people and believing the future is brighter than the past is sort of the core idea that sort of unifies AOL, stuff I'm doing with Revolution, some of the stuff I'm doing on the public policy front or Startup America. It's really about celebrating entrepreneurship. And some of that is starting a company like AOL. Some of that's investing in companies and mentoring entrepreneurs, which I'm doing through Revolution. And some of that's kind of trying to create a more of a atmosphere, a climate, a foundation for all entrepreneurs, with a particular focus on the United States.
Good afternoon. My name is Carla Howard. I just left local government. I work with entrepreneurs and assisting them with business incentives. And one thing that I learned from working with entrepreneurs is that there's several business incentives that are available either via the federal government, state and local government. So my question to you, I currently, I just left, I work in private industry doing the same thing now. But my question to you is, will there ever be, or will Startup America take those incentives or those programs and put them into one portal? Because one thing that I do know is that there's not money for necessarily everything, but there's so many different resources or vehicles that businesses could use, but they just don't know that they're out there. So is there a way to, I guess, take what we have now and build upon that and then assess what we do need?
Yeah, and I think there's some efforts underway to do that. Startup America Partnership is trying to do some of that. Actually, the SBA recently relaunched their site probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And part of the effort was, the Small Business Administration, part of the effort was to create a more unified kind of portal you're describing where people could basically find out what resources are available, because there are a lot of things that people aren't aware of. And even some of the things like their loan guarantee program, I mentioned this Under Armour story, and Kevin Plank, he told me that basically Under Armour wouldn't have happened without a $250,000 bank loan that was, I think, 90% guaranteed by the SBA, because it was too risky for the bank to give him the loan initially because it was just getting going. But the SBA loan guarantee program in that case, working through a bank, not doing it directly, but working through a bank, was essentially gave him the initial capital that created this company worth billions of dollars and now hiring having thousands and thousands of employees. So there are interesting programs out there that are useful to a lot of people, but generally people are unaware of them. So a lot of it goes back to this network effect kind of thing, connect the dots kind of thing. It's just how do you get people together, sharing perspectives, helping each other out? How do you make sure people understand what programs are available? If there's one thing that a lot of young companies have a problem with is just finding customers. So one of the things we're doing with Startup America is how do you, if you have a company, what's the way to get into General Electric, for example, if you think that they're a logical customer, sort of building connections between the big companies and the little companies that one day aspire to be big companies. There's a lot that could be done there too.
Time for one more question. One right here.
Yes, Mr. Case. My name's Patty Stevens. I'm from Fairfax County, Virginia, and I thank you.
Fairfax County, Virginia.
Thank you for your work in investing in closing the digital computer divide many years ago. We continue to have that divide in Fairfax, and I know even to a greater extent in the rest of the state. And in looking at some of the educational issues that we looked at earlier, children who come to school that don't have access to the technology tools that others have will further continue that divide. Do you have ideas on how our school systems and our communities can get those resources into the children's hands that need them so we can grow them into STEM workforce of tomorrow?
Yeah, I think as you said, I think it's gotten better. 15 years ago, I was very concerned about this digital divide issue, and we did launch the Case Foundation, an initiative called Power Up, and built 1,000 technology centers and boys and girls clubs and churches and schools and so forth all around the country to basically make sure people had access to computers and access to the internet. Because even back 15 years ago, people were starting to assign homework that kind of required that, and a lot of people didn't have access to it. So in the last 15 years, I think a lot of that problem has been dealt with, but there are still places where that's not the case, or they have access to computers, but they don't have access to, to the internet. So I think it will require a continuing effort. Our particular focus, particularly regional focus, actually something that Mark Warner helped start, Venture Philanthropy Partners, VPP, which works in that broader kind of DC, Virginia, Maryland area, and I think they're working on some of those, some initiatives related to education and technology, and we're happy to be playing kind of a support role there.
Well, Steve, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate
Thank
you
you
coming
all.
down.
Again, thank you for being here and doing it.